Act of 1679. What is habeas corpus, and to what extent, if any, is it essential in the principle of limited government? How has the writ of habeas corpus evolved in the United States? And lastly, under what circumstances, if any, might the writ of habeas corpus place an unreasonable burden on the government? We begin when ready.
The habeas corpus secures every man here, alien or citizen, against everything which is not law, whatever shape it may assume. Thomas Jefferson. A writ of habeas corpus is used to bring a detainee before the courts in order to determine if their detainment is lawful. Habeas corpus first originated in the 39th clause of the Magna Carta. The Habeas Corpus Act of 1679 was passed by Parliament in order to strengthen the writ that was a part of common law in England. This act helped secure personal liberties for English citizens, such as preventing unlawful imprisonment. This act and the clause of Magna Carta helped inspire the founding fathers to include the idea that no government shall be able to deprive citizens of their fundamental natural rights of life, liberty, and property in the Constitution. Habeas corpus is essential to the principle of limited government, as it is the fundamental instrument for safeguarding individual freedom against arbitrary and lawless state action, as stated by the Supreme Court.
Habeas corpus is essential to guaranteeing our basic rights and is embedded into our Constitution. Preventing the unlawful imprisonment of an individual is crucial for the survival of our democracy. Habeas corpus is one of the many tools in our democracy to ensure a limited government. As stated by Alexander Hamilton, it is not tyranny we desire, it is a just limited federal government. Our founding fathers arose from a place where there was no justice and a government which was free to do whatever it pleased with no repercussions. Many were falsely imprisoned for crimes in which they did not commit or were given unjust punishments. In the United States, we have established certain rights to ensure that we do not repeat past mistakes and are able to limit the government. Rights such as the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, which grants American citizens due process and fair and speedy trial, have all been placed to protect citizens from the corruption of government. The Eighth Amendment also shows how habeas corpus is essential to modern-day society by preventing any and all cruel and unusual punishments. Habeas corpus is one of the many required tools in our arsenal to fight against the abuse of government, and without it, we will be weak and vulnerable.
The 13th century English foundations of habeas corpus were readily adopted by the US in the argument for the inclusion of the Bill of Rights and in the suspension clause in the body of the Constitution itself, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2. Throughout the last 2 centuries, the writ of habeas corpus has been further expanded to protect the rights of the accused. Firstly, the Judiciary Act of 1789 authorized a relief to federal prisoners. Then, following the Civil War, the same expansion took place yet again to relieve state prisoners who were incarcerated in violation of federal law or under the wrong jurisdiction. It can be argued that the largest expansion of the writ took place in 1925, with the incorporation of the Bill of Rights into state law, thanks to Gitlow v. New York. This paved the way for defendants throughout the US to use the writ as a means to defend their civil liberties against illegal state and federal government action. Today, the writ of habeas corpus is used to challenge the legality of state and federal laws, used to make convictions, detentions in immigration and deportation cases, and military court proceedings, as well as to determine preliminary matters like bail, parole, and double jeopardy.
The writ of habeas corpus, while essential to our list of rights in the United States, creates a challenge that our government has to work against. The idea of habeas corpus lies upon the fact that if a well-delivered explanation can satisfy the court on whether or not a person should be in detention. Historically, the writ of habeas corpus was extended to those who were imprisoned without judicial process. However, currently, the right has expanded to all those serving prison sentences. With such an expansion on the right itself, it places a larger burden on the government's shoulders on weighing the safety of its citizens or protecting a singular person's right. The suspension clause in Article 1, Section 9, however, gives room for the government to work with habeas corpus. Under this clause, the exception arises when an invasion or rebellion endangers the public safety, and the president can imprison people indefinitely without any judicial check. The writ of habeas corpus has been suspended 4 times since the Constitution was ratified. For example, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and while the writ of habeas corpus places a burden on the country's shoulders, other suspensions put in place allow the government to take appropriate action while maintaining our civil liberties.
Okay, let's get started. So just basically, does the writ of habeas corpus guarantee justice?
To answer your question, Judge, it does not guarantee that outcome. What the writ of habeas corpus does guarantee is the right for the accused to challenge the legality under which they are being detained or arrested or convicted. But it
As
doesn't.
I apologize. As I mentioned in my own opening arguments, we have amendments in place such as the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, which prevent the government from abusing individuals who are being accused of the crime. In the United States, we have a system in place, a judicial system in place that is built to benefit the accused. For example, once a person is accused, they are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Because we have habeas corpus, it prevents people to have unjust punishments or to be accused of a crime without a fair or speedy trial.
Let me
As to
follow-
add
go-
on,
go ahead.
sorry, as
No,
to
no,
add on to what my colleagues have stated, I do not think habeas corpus guarantees justice, but it is a step towards justice because the Sixth Amendment has been influenced by habeas corpus, which allows these defendants to go before the court, before the judges, and before their final detainment.
So just a quick follow-up is like, okay, so I agree. How is our judicial system working in terms of really providing those protections to everybody? Do we have a fair and just justice system?
I tend to agree. I believe that we do have a somewhat fair system. No system in the world is going to be perfect. However, we do have systems in place that benefit us or benefit the defendant. For example, the case that we just had last week with Mr. Chavarak. I apologize if I do not pronounce his last name correctly, but we did give him the right to a fair and speedy trial. He was presumed to be innocent until proven guilty by a jury. Therefore, it shows that the system does work to a certain extent.
Precedents, to add on to what my colleague is saying, precedents has shown time and time again that usually our courts try to justly put people where they belong and bring justice to families who are victims. And as my colleague said, no system is ever going to be perfect. But as we can see from America's history with cases, usually what happens is that those who are accused are rightfully either put where they need to be or are let go because they were innocent. And that whole idea of innocent till proven guilty is already a parameter before we need to use any sort of habeas corpus. So that's why habeas corpus isn't essentially the first decision that we should go to, but it acts as a backup in case our court does fail us, which we can see is usually not the case.
Great, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge.
Go ahead.
I would actually disagree with my colleague in that I believe the writ of habeas corpus should be one of the principal rights, if not privileges, granted to citizens of the United States or people in the United States in general. And one of these cases in which this principle is one of the only that is maintained is actually in dealing with the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, that were held in relation to the 9/11 attacks of 2001. In September 2nd of 2020, they reached a decision in which they concurred that none of these prisoners are actually entitled to due process as granted by the US Constitution, but rather the only right that they were actually granted is to challenge the legality of their detainment, the writ of habeas corpus itself. And they agreed and reached a decision that this is the only fundamental right that these prisoners are entitled to. And I agree with this decision because every person should be able to challenge the legality and the circumstances of their detainment.
Great, awesome, thank you.
In the very end of the prepared remarks, we touched on some of the instances when the writ has been suspended, and after Pearl Harbor, I think we were talking about Japanese internment. Another famous case is right at the beginning of the Civil War, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus. I wonder what you all think. Was Lincoln justified in doing what he did?
I believe that President Lincoln, he believed that suspending the writ of habeas corpus at that time was justified, as he used Article 1, Section 9, that when there is an invasion in the country, that it shall be suspended. Although I personally do not agree, because even people who are committed of treason, they still have the right to have witnesses in their trials and have a trial before they are convicted of treason. So although they may be convicted of these crimes, I do believe that everyone has the right to go before a judge.
I'm sorry.
To echo off what my colleague was saying, beforehand, habeas corpus was only applied to those who were imprisoned without judicial process. And as I said in my speech, now it has expanded to everyone who has served any or is going to serve or is under the way of serving a prison sentence. When it comes to Lincoln's use of the suspension clause, it was for those who were deemed threatening to military operations. And in this time, Civil War was happening. There was a rebellion essentially, and that's why the suspension clause is where it is. So that way it can be used at the appropriate times in which sometimes habeas corpus is not the first decision to go to, or in order to protect the public safety.
Thank you.
All right, I'll take off down a slightly different track, I guess. You referenced military court proceedings, and in the last 20 years and a little beyond, the war on terror and some of the issues around enemy combatants. In your research, what did you discern around the writ as it relates to enemy combatants, and kind of elaborate on that briefly, if you would?
I'm sorry, Judge, can you clarify your question?
Well, so enemy combatants against the United States, some of whom may not be in the country, in the United States. Did you come across anything on how the writ of habeas corpus relates in those instances? It's partially related to Guantanamo Bay too, because some of them are there. So,
Well, go ahead.
The case that I brought up that was recently decided, it was actually an appellate decision based off of the Supreme Court case in Boumediene v. Bush, where Guantanamo detainees could challenge the lawfulness of their detention. So these individuals that are being incarcerated at Guantanamo Bay because of their relation to Al-Qaeda and the attacks themselves, they are the ones that are exercising this privilege, this writ of habeas corpus under the US Constitution.
and do you agree with that ruling?
I very much agree with that ruling, because it also ruled that they are not entitled to due process itself, which is one of the very fundamental rights granted to citizens of the United States itself. But given that these individuals are not citizens of the United States, but
You can finish your thought.
rather aliens, it is my opinion that they shouldn't be granted due process, but that the very fundamental principle to challenge their detainment under the writ of habeas corpus is something that they should be allowed.
Thank you very much. Nicely done, folks.
Yeah, very good. So we want to hear a big rousing applause for you, but no, thank you. It was an exceptional job. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was like I was having, coffee and just talking with really bright young people, and it just gives me energy. I like your depth of understanding the historical foundations. You brought a variety of pieces of evidence to support yourselves. You gave good reasons for what you had to say, and that's key, right? You didn't just throw out stuff, but you explained to us, well, why does that fit in with your argument? And making an argument based on evidence is the key, right, to every society, and you get that. And I think you recognize, and I clearly you recognize, the very importance of habeas corpus as a fundamental component of our constitutional system. As you go forward, whether it be tomorrow or just in your lives as young Americans, keep thinking about how this is all working out. I'm not sure I would agree. I'd love to talk to you more about it, but I'm not sure I'd agree with you that this whole judicial system is really working out all that fairly for everybody. I think there's some racial and ethnicity barriers. There's some social and financial barriers that certain groups in our society are maybe not getting a fair shake. However, I have no doubt that you all know about that, and you're going to go do great things in your future. So good luck to you.
Thank you.
I would echo those compliments. I like the breadth of evidence that was brought up in the beginning. We heard from Jefferson, we heard from Hamilton, the Judiciary Act of 1789, some Supreme Court stuff. I like that at times you guys were comfortable disagreeing with each other. There's no right or wrong answers to these questions, and that's why, like, they're written the way that they are. They're supposed to be thought-provoking, and if everyone's just agreeing, then we're all going to get real bored real fast. I want to say that I think it was Mr. Fox's first question that he asked at the follow-up was tricky, and I think you guys handled it well in its nuances. I wrote that down. I appreciate that you've clearly answered all components of the question in your prepared remarks. That was appreciated. And I would just say the few times when there was some interrupting of each other, One, I mean, it's tricky to do on Zoom, but even if it was happening in person, that's not a knock. I'm not knocking for that. I think it's a good thing. I think it shows that you guys are excited and you're energized and you're eager to jump in. I think maybe that's what Mr. Fox was getting at when he said that he in turn was energized, and I certainly share that. So thank you very much. This was enjoyable.
Thank you, Judge.
Yeah, very nicely done, folks. I know maybe hearing from the judges sounds a little bit repetitive, but that's a good thing actually, because we were all impressed by your presentation. What both my colleagues have already referenced, you had a impressive breadth of knowledge. You were able to pull in different citations. You did it once you were past your essay, which hit all of the points in the question, you then were able to do it in a conversational way, but well reinforced with critical thinking and citations and evidence sort of across time, which is really an indicator of how well versed you are in this. As was also referenced, it's nice to hear actually some disagreement, and here's why I disagree, and sort of these two counter arguments, which we could, as has been pointed out, we could use more of that going on kind of nationally. So anyway, very nicely done, and we wish you well in this competition, as well as it's clear you'll be successful moving on. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you, judges.
Thank
Okay.
you so much for your
Awesome.
time today.
Good job, coach.